Yo, what's up? Welcome to Take a Breather episode 12. I got a good guest this week. We're actually starting a new 4-week series called Stretch. So that's what we're doing this week. And yeah, it's going to be a good week. Stay tuned for the joke of the week, song of the week, and some other stuff. I don't know, we're going to have some fun. Alright, so before we get started, we got some housekeeping to do. First things first, I'm having some, I guess, not some trouble, but I'm trying to figure out how to spread the word that we have this youth group going on. I guess the reason I'm doing this YouTube show and this online youth group essentially is what I'm trying to build is because my youth group growing up meant so much to me. I made some of my closest friends at youth group. I have some of my fondest memories of youth group. I grew so close to God in my youth group. My youth group is so important to me. And I think that every kid deserves to have a youth group of their own. Unfortunately, some kids don't have the opportunity to have a youth group. Maybe their church is so small that their youth group is, that person and their sister, or that person and one other family. Maybe there's kids whose parents just don't go to church, and they don't really have the opportunity to get involved in a youth group or know how to get involved in a youth group. There are other kids who just have questions about God, and they're just wanting to know a place where they can come to learn about Jesus and about God. That's what this is for. If you enjoy your youth group, if you enjoy the youth group that you have and the experiences and the memories that you've had in your youth group, what I want you to do is, for the sake of all the kids out there, yeah, I'm playing hardball, for the sake of all the kids out there, go ahead and share this video, share this YouTube channel, and get the word out there that we have a safe haven for kids who need a youth group. That's the whole point of this. I'd appreciate it. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Like our videos, comment, whatever you want, but the main thing is they spread the word that we actually have an online youth group that you can be a part of from your house. This next guest who we're about to talk to, I'm super excited about. Super cool guy. I've seen him speak at Celebration and at Winterfest, and it was really impactful. This is Phil Brookman. Everybody give it up for Phil Brookman. How's it going, Phil? You doing all right, man?
It's going all right. It's going all right, yeah.
Good stuff. So y'all ready for quarantine to be over or what?
Yeah, kind of like everybody else, we're just ready for it to be over and ready for a vaccine to get here and ready for it all to go back to the way it used to be. And then at least right now we have all the COVID stuff happening. And then on top of that, the whole country being just pulled apart with the racial issues. It's really sad. And it's really hard to deal with all that right now.
Oh yeah, it's definitely difficult. But I found through, and we kind of talked about just a minute ago, I thought, kind of found that really the only way to figure that, I guess, wade through all this and figure out all this is really just look to Scripture, look to what God says. Because, we all have our own opinions and we all have our own thoughts, and everybody has their own different thoughts. And so it's like, where do you go? The only way you can go, really, at least if you ask me, is Jesus. But anyway, so this week's topic of the week is stretch your faith. We're specifically talking about this week how to stretch your faith by making a commitment. One week is stretch your faith by taking a step. One is stretching your faith even when you fail. So it's going to be it's been a good month as far as lessons go. But that's the topic of the week. Phil, when it comes to stretching your faith, what's one of the biggest points in your life where you feel like your faith was stretched or, I guess, put to its breaking point?
Let's see. For me, I would say one season would be a more of an intellectual faith struggle, and that was in college when you start reading a lot more, not just from the Bible, but about the Bible and how it was made, and you start dealing with all these really, really hard questions like, what do you do with contradictions in Scripture, and what do you do with conflicting accounts of creation from other sources, and what do you do when the biblical timeline doesn't really seem to match up with uh, you know scientific timeline, and those questions were hard, and so I didn't exactly know what the answers were, and so I do remember having a season in college of like, whoa, what? How do I know that any of this is true, and what if it's not? And it
Yeah.
was a really unsettling time. So that'd be one, and then I had another season in my life where, and a lot of people would say this, where you experience a lot of suffering and pain. Either some people it's their own suffering, some people they're just with others that are just kind of done for with tragedy, and that's hard too. And so I've had quite a bit of seasons where I'm specifically walking with people whose worlds are just falling apart, just people dying and suicide and all sorts of just sad things, and it's hard sometimes to figure out where is God in the middle of all this.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think when people are at their worst, they're looking for something to cling to, and anything, whether it's alcohol or drugs or God, hopefully, or family or faith or whatever it might be. But people are begging to find something to cling to, especially in times of turmoil. And so, not to get back in politics or hot topics or whatever how you want to describe it, but I think that right now in America, there's a lot of people who are trying to find something to cling to, and I think it's our job as Christians to introduce God into it and to inject God into the mix. That's actually partially why I joined the law enforcement, but I think that's the biggest thing we can do as Christians. Anyways, I think you're totally right. You look at different points where people in the Bible had to stretch their faith, and it's all most of it is through difficult times. I'd say in the Bible. Would you say that, or
Yeah, I think that yeah, it's hard to stretch when things are great. Like
right?
even true of our own bodies. Like you don't get stronger or faster or fitter by sitting around. You get stronger and faster and fitter when you work out and
Be
work
nice if I did, though.
muscles down. Like it hurts, but then when your body rebuilds those muscles, they come back stronger and
Yeah.
faster. I think the same is true with faith. We generally struggle in times of tragedy and difficulty, but when we're surrounded by the right people and kind of get through that, even though it's hard, I tend to think that on the other side of things we come out stronger. I know others would say the same thing, but I find it really interesting that some people often commandeer the suffering of others as an argument against God. Usually, if
Mhm.
an atheist or an agnostic talk about the suffering argument, often they'll grab someone else's story and they'll say, well, such and such happened in such and such place, and it was this tsunami and this hurricane and this person were suffering, therefore there can't be a God. But then if you actually talk to someone who's really been through it, what I have found in my personal experience is that these people are like,
Unshakable.
my faith is the only thing that got me through this.
Yeah.
This lady, I was talking to her the other day from my church, and she was abused as a child. Her mom said, "You're worth less than." It was something super vulgar. You're worth less than was it the chalk from the? I think she said something about the rear end of the devil. I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was just the
No.
most debilitating. Like, anyway, this lady has some severe childhood trauma, abused, got totally into the prostitution, drug scene, prison, got out, found the guy, married him, and he died last year of cancer. She's
Wow.
had those pretty difficult lives, and she told me, she said, I don't know where I'd be without God. Like, my suffering has not pushed me away from God. My suffering has actually drawn me closer to God. So I think it's just important that we just be careful that don't just hijack the suffering of somebody else as your argument against God, because the sufferers often are drawn to God through their suffering. So one way I think about faith is that there are there's a lot of like really helpful arguments for why it's reasonable to think that there's a God, and those are really, there's a lot of them, and I find a lot of them interesting. But one particular train of thought that just this last year has been really beneficial to me is looking at the social impact Jesus made historically. John Ortberg writes a lot about this, and the premise is this: if you think about it, so when does someone reach their peak influence? Usually that's around probably their 50s, 60s, the peak of their career. They're established, and so they have a lot of influence. And then usually in the last 10, 15 years of someone's life, they lose influence. And then when they pass away, their family loves them and knows them. And they have friends that know them and love them. But then if you fast forward 20 years, if you fast forward 50 years, I know this sounds depressing, but most of us, no one's going to know that we even existed 50 or 60 years after we passed away. It's just the way it works. Well, if you think about when Jesus died, he did have some influence, but the influence he had 100 years after his death, and 200 years after his death, and 500 years after his death was substantially more than when he was actually alive. When he's alive, Acts tells us that there's 120 people in the church in Acts after the Son of God just did ministry for 3 years. So his influence when he was on earth was there to a degree, but then what's amazing is that as the decades start to unfold and the centuries start to unfold, his influence just really expand. Like one thing I love to think about is like anytime you write your birthday or you have to write the date on a piece of paper,
Right.
you are writing the year of how old Jesus would be if he was still alive today. Like we've divided our entire calendar of human history on the birth of Jesus.
Yeah.
That way back in the day, there was like dozens of calendars all over the world, and it was usually like in the 13th year of Hezekiah, in the 15th year of such and such. Every culture kind of did it their own way. But then like in the, I don't know, 4th or 5th century, all these world leaders got together and said, all right, we need to find a calendar that we can all agree upon. And they asked the question, what event can we all agree on as like a really, really defining moment in the history of our world? And they picked the birth of Jesus. So I guess all that to say, if he's not divine, if he's not the Son of God, if he did not rise from the dead, then why is he the dividing line of history? Like
Right.
enormous impact on society that it's hard to explain that from any other vantage point other than he actually rose from the dead.
Yeah. It is amazing how, now that you say that, how, I guess, widespread Christianity is. Of course, not everybody knows Jesus, and not everybody, I'm sure there are parts of the world who's never heard of him. But how widespread one guy was and has become. The Acts of the Apostles, and how they were given this mission to spread the word, and how they did it so effectively, and they did it in a way where you don't just know about Jesus, but you're convicted to tell other people about Jesus. And it's this constant thing that has sustained Jesus Christ throughout decades and centuries and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting stuff.
There's a lot of things in our society that we all accept as normal that came from Jesus, and that we don't even realize they came from Jesus. So easy one would be hospitals. Most hospitals, if you trace their origin and history, they come from the Jesus movement. The Christians would take care of the sick. And education's the same way. The modern educational system, it actually goes back to when the early Christians were trying to live out the Great Commission, go make disciples of all nations, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. Well, they thought, okay, well, people need to be able to read to learn what Jesus taught. And so the origin of the modern educational system, you can trace that back to Jesus. Another one that I find super interesting is that, so in our day, like everybody loves children, and it's just accepted. Children are wonderful, and we should take care of them, and they're amazing. Well, that wasn't always the case. So there was this practice in the Roman Empire called exposure, where you take an infant and you just take him outside the city wall if you didn't want it, and you would just, there were trash heaps of babies. So you might A lot of them were baby girls because most people in that day wanted a boy, or sometimes it would just be, hey, I've already got 7 kids. I can't divide my inheritance another direction. And so over and over, people just take their babies out to this trash heap. And there's actually this archaeological find a few years ago where they found 100 skeletons of babies. So it's just horrible, horrible.
Mm.
Uh, they didn't name kids till the 8th day in the Roman world because they didn't feel like they had an identity until then. It was basically to give them a week to decide, hey, do you want to keep this or not?
Mm.
Well, this lady wrote this book, really interesting book, and the title of the book is When Children Became People. And she traces the modern movement of, everybody loves kids. She traces that back in time, and it actually goes to Jesus.
Wow.
In his day, what does he walk around saying? He walked around saying, blessed are the, or don't hinder the children from coming to the kingdom. The kingdom is for the little ones. Blessed are the children. The disciples try to push the
Blessed
kids.
are those that are like children,
Yeah, you come to me, and so Jesus actually changed the way the world thought about kids. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
That much impact.
Oh yeah, I think yeah, it really is amazing once you really find look at the story and just each person has their own individual story, and a lot of times those are just fascinating. And then you look at the story of how the word has spread from Jesus to now, and then we're still me and you and other people, all kinds of people are still passionate about spreading His word. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, from a guy that died a brutal death thousands of years ago, we're still talking about it. Like there's something happened. Like the a few hundred years after Jesus lived, the Christians. So in those first few decades after Jesus died and went back into heaven, Christians started going to the trash heaps and getting the babies, and they started taking care of them. And
Hmm.
eventually, when Constantine made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire, he finally outlawed exposure. Like, okay, we're done with this. It's now illegal. So then, when people had babies they didn't want, they started taking them to the church, and they would leave it on the doorsteps of the church. And so that's where like modern day orphanages were born, again, out of this movement from this rustic poor carpenter named Jesus. And so again, like something happened to make this movement so prolific in the world. And I think the most plausible explanation is that he actually rose from the dead. If he didn't rise from the dead, man, like this is the greatest deception of all time.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you kind of argue that with people, and some people like to argue that and say, well, it's impossible for somebody to be raised from the dead. And it's like, yeah, you're right. If there's not a God, but if there is one, this is totally plausible. Not only is it plausible, but like you said, it's even reasonable. I think one of the biggest things I tell my teens, and it's kind of a shift in I guess conversation, but biggest thing I tell my teens is, it's okay to wrestle and struggle with your faith. There's nothing wrong with that. You should be struggling with your faith. If you're not struggling with your faith, you're probably static. But it's very possible, and it's wise to, while you're struggling with your faith and wrestling with it, to hold on to that same faith. I think sometimes a lot of people, when they start exploring Jesus and exploring Christ and exploring their faith, and maybe they've been going to church forever, and now they're like, you know what, maybe all that's wrong. A lot of people, what they want to do is just jump off board and dive headfirst, into the waters. And it's very possible to question your faith and wrestle with it while still clinging on and holding on to that faith.
Mm-hmm.
You can do both. People think it's one or the other, and it's not.
Oh, I think you're right. That's the crux of the matter with the guy in Mark who says, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. That is simply part of I think the human experience, and it doesn't make us weird, doesn't make us strange. It's okay. Like I'm very comfortable with that. And I think it's also worth saying that, sometimes we pigeonhole faith into a category where we say faith is intellect and faith is reason and faith is these arguments. And well, that's part of faith, but I think it's so important to remember that when this movement started, it wasn't called the doctrine, it was called the way, as in the way of life. Like it was a there was this certain set of practices and these certain codes that they lived by, this radical love of neighbor, and we're not going to show favoritism, and we're going to treat each other with dignity, and we're going to love old people, and we're going to love kids, and we're not going to treat you differently based on how much money you make or the color of your skin. Like it was the way, and it was this radical new upside down movement, and that's what people were drawn towards. And I think sometimes when certain people have faith struggles, it's because they put all their eggs in the intellectual basket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's important, but if we just learn to like embody the church and the movement and scripture and start to practice these things, I actually think faith gets a lot easier, because then faith becomes what you're doing and not just, this intellectual thing going on in your head.
Have you seen the movie Onward? It's kind of it's a new Disney movie. The Blue Guys, yeah, with Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, who is it's my fave.
Yeah.
There's a scene in there, and it totally reminds me of this, but where he has this staff and it can do all kinds of magic, and they like come across this crevice, and they have to get to the other side. The bridge is broken, all kinds of stuff, and basically, Tom Holland, I guess the character of Tom Holland, casts this spell, and it makes this invisible bridge, and he knows he casts the spell, and he knows it's there in his head, but does his heart know that? And so that first step of faith where, all right, I'm stepping out, I don't know if this is going to hold me, I might die. Like that's how it is for everybody. That's how it was with my faith and anybody's faith. But, like you said, a lot of times you get in that intellectual faith and the like intellectual side of everything, and that's great. But there comes a point where you're going to have to go, okay, let's see if all this intellectual stuff holds any weight and holds any water. And let's see if I can actually put my life on this.
Yeah, we have an inner city church. We're taking care of the poor in Oklahoma City, and a few years ago, this guy, he's a super nice guy, but grew up an atheist, does not believe in God, didn't want anything to do with that. Well, he befriended he befriended a volunteer with the inner city ministry, and the volunteer, just basically their job was they got in a van, they drove various places on Wednesdays and Sundays, they picked up inner city kids, and they brought them to church, fed them a meal, took them home. Well, the volunteer and the atheist became friends, and one day the volunteer said, "Hey, would you like to come with me to, pick up these inner city kids and give them a meal?" And the atheist was like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." Well, then the atheist started doing it for he loved it. And so every week he would be like, "I got to pick up the kids. I got to pick up the kids. I got to pick up the kids." Well, then 3 or 4 months into it, he'd go to the church services. He wouldn't sing. He didn't really care about the church service. But 5 or 6 weeks into it, then he's like, he kind of liked the songs. He started singing along. He's like, "Yeah, I kind of like this music." And then finally he said, "All right, who is this? Who is this Jesus guy?" And so then, a few weeks later, the guy studies scripture, and the guy ends up getting baptized. But what's amazing is that it wasn't the belief that led him to Jesus. It was behavior. I'm going to love the world. I'm going to serve the least of these. I'm going to have compassion. Oh, that's what Jesus does? All right, I want to be part of that movement. I think it's a really helpful way to even be evangelistic, is to say, hey, why don't you come into this way of life and see if you like it? And if you like it, man, there's a lot to be said about why we do what we do, because we believe in this man named Jesus.
I think you're totally right. And I think kind of eye-opening for the church, at least where we're at. We do a lot of good stuff here, and I think our church is great. I've been here my whole life. But I think there are places where we lack. And I think one of those places is, I think sometimes our church gets into the habit of going, well, this is, you go to church on Sunday morning and on Wednesday night, and, you go to your Bible studies or you do your thing, and then that's it. But church is so much more than that. Church is about being with each other and growing closer to God with each other. And it's like this beautiful picture of community and faith in God and Jesus. But we fall into the trap of this is just, and myself too, we fall into the trap of this is just something we do on Sundays and Wednesdays. And the behavior side is just check mark. I guess something that myself and our church and churches across America and across the world need to really watch out for, because it's dangerous. It's a dangerous, slippery slope, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho.
Yeah, I think a lot about like what's the point of the church, and that I started a series about what is the point of the church, like, and I think that corporate identity is formed from either you can either talk about the boundaries of an organization. Think about a farm, like you've got the fence, and then you've got the farm itself,
Hmm.
and the fence defines like who's in, who's out, and every movement, every religious organization has their parameters for who's in
Yeah.
and maybe it's just atheists are out, believers are in, or certain belief systems are out, certain belief systems are in, certain doctrinal principles are out.
Right.
That's the fence, and the fence is important. It's not like we don't need that, but then there's like, well, what's the core? Like, what's the farm? Like, what are we really doing here? And to me, when it comes to my faith, like the middle, the center is like God created the world, sin has destroyed the world. He sent his son to defeat death, to beat sin. He rose from the dead, and he's asked us to build his kingdom and to be people of love. Like that's my center core doctrinal, I guess, belief. Just death and resurrection of Jesus, greatest two commandments. So I really want to spend a lot of my energy on that, and then let the periphery stuff be periphery. And I think we get it bent out of shape when we spend a lot of our lives and our thinking only focused on building a really strong front fence because we want to make sure that the people that are out stay out.
Hmm.
I don't want to do that. I want to spend my time in the middle.
And if the focus is on the middle, let's say the focus is on that core of the farm, then if people go to the core, they're in the farm. You
They're in
know,
it. Yeah,
they're in the farm.
yeah, got it. That's a good
Way to
point.
put it. Good stuff, man. We'll go ahead and wrap up here, but I think my recording it has like a 30-minute time limit, and then it's like, nope.
Oh, okay.
But that's Phil Brookman. Phil, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know if you're with family and everything, but I really do appreciate it. Maybe we can have you on some other time too. So
You bet. Blessings to you, Luke. Thanks for having me on, and hope everybody stays safe and warm and well during this very strange season.